huge foreign aid bill for Ukraine passes through the US Senate.
The EU's foreign policy chief compares the scale of destruction in Gaza to German cities in World War II. Italy's Senate passes an amendment allowing anti-abortion groups access to women considering the procedure in public clinics.
An unseasonal cold snap across much of Europe worries fruit farmers, who fear their summer harvests will be badly hit.
The US Senate approved a huge military aid package for Ukraine, Israel and Taiwan.
The motion to concur in the House
Most of the fund, which is about 88 billion euros, is to restock Kyiv's depleted air and battlefield defenses.
Even as Moscow, Beijing and Tehran grew more convinced that our influence had run its course, and even as loud voices here at home insisted on abandoning the responsibilities of leadership, America stepped up and the Senate held firm.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky expressed his gratitude online, saying the vote reinforces America's role as a beacon of democracy. The much-delayed vote was passed by 79 against 18. The aid in Ukraine is desperately needed on the battlefield.
The European Union's foreign policy chief has compared the scale of destruction across Gaza to damage to German cities in World War II. Josep Borrell was speaking during a plenary session of the EU Parliament on the bloc's response to the killing of humanitarian aid workers, journalists and civilians in Gaza.
The cities in Gaza have been more destroyed than the German cities during the Second World War. Just imagine the comparison. A recent interim damage assessment by the World Bank and by the United Nations, which has been supported financially by the European Union, assessed the direct damage of about 90 billion.
Meanwhile, the head of UNRWA said attacks on the Palestinian Support Agency were intended to strip Palestinians of their refugee status. Philippe Lazzarini made those remarks a day after a report was submitted following an investigation into UNRWA over Israeli allegations that some of the agency's staff had assisted Hamas with the October 7th attacks on Israel. Those claims prompted at least 15 countries to suspend funding.
I hope that with this report and the measure we will be putting in place, that the last group of donors will get the necessary confidence to come back as a donor and partner of the agency.
And German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier's second day of a three-day visit to Turkey was marked by more pro-Palestine protests to denounce Berlin's military support for Israel.
Bu bir insanlık suçudur. Bütün vicdanı olan insanlar buna karşı çıkmalıdır. Biz de bugün buna karşı çıkmak için Almanya'da Steinmeier'in İsrail'e verdiği desteğe karşı çıkmak için buraya geldik.
Human rights lawyers said earlier this month that they had filed an urgent appeal against the German government to stop it exporting weapons to Israel.
With Russia's bombardment of Ukraine intensifying in recent months, calls for Russian state assets to fund Kiev's defence efforts are growing. MEPs made the call during the final European Parliament session ahead of the June elections. They say Russia needs to pay.
Not often are the moral, legal, political and economic arguments for action as strong as in the case for confiscating Russia's state assets to help Ukraine. Europe needs to seize all of Russia's underlying assets, and it must do so now.
EU countries have been discussing a €3 billion aid package for Ukraine, using the interest from capital held within the bloc by the Russian Central Bank. Some MEPs say the EU needs to do more in line with other allies.
By the time being, we are not going to to seize the capital, because there's not enough clarity about what we can do and what we cannot do. Certainly, we would be very happy if we could take 300,000 million euros.
Borrell says the bloc should be able to profit from Russia's holdings so Ukraine can defend itself, rather than using seized assets only to fund reconstruction. But he says the decisions must be lawful.
Britain's Home Secretary James Cleverly has said the government is doing all it can to stop dangerous crossings by migrants in the English Channel. Cleverly is in Rome to discuss ways to jointly stem illegal migration from North Africa. His visit comes a day after the British Parliament passed the controversial Rwanda bill, which will see some illegal migrants sent to the African country, legislation that's been slammed by lawyers and human rights groups.
This new legislation seriously hinders the rule of law in the UK, and it sets a perilous precedent globally. It is critical to the protection of the human rights and dignity of refugees and migrants seeking protection that all removals from the UK are carried out after assessing their specific individual circumstances in strict compliance with international human rights and refugee law.
The bill has also been met with dismay by some Rwandans living in the capital Kigali, some of whom were themselves refugees.
Of course, it is also strange because somebody who is in the UK should not be coming to a country like Rwanda, which is poorer. So we would expect that the UK would have more resources to accommodate more refugees.
Cleverly is due to meet his Italian counterpart Matteo Piantidosi in Lampedusa on Wednesday to accelerate joint work on cracking down on irregular migration. It comes after Italy announced last year it would open third-country migrant processing centres in Albania, which was criticised as falling outside EU law.
In a surreal display for a Wednesday morning, two riderless horses have been spotted galloping through London's busiest districts. The animals were eventually contained by police officers 6 kilometres east of central London, with 4 people injured.
Italy's Senate has passed an amendment which allows anti-abortion groups access to women considering the procedure in public clinics. The government says the amendment fulfills the original intent of the 1978 law legalising abortion, which includes provisions to prevent the procedure. Opponents have questioned the wisdom of allowing medically unqualified groups access to clinics.
Già questo sta succedendo in alcune regioni, dei personaggi che non si sa quale qualifica abbiano, certo non hanno studiato, non hanno superato concorsi, per andare a parlare con le donne di argomenti per cui già il consultorio ha figure altamente qualificate per affrontarli.
Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni has dismissed opposition to the bill, saying that allowing those with a pro-life message into abortion clinics was only intended to fully inform women.
Io penso che noi dobbiamo garantire una scelta libera. Penso che per garantire una scelta libera si debbano avere tutte le informazioni e le opportunità del caso, e questo è quello che prevede la legge 194 e penso che sia la cosa giusta da fare.
Under Italian law, a woman is permitted to have an abortion on request in the first 12 weeks of pregnancy, or later if her health or life is endangered. But access isn't always guaranteed. The law also allows healthcare personnel to register as conscientious objectors and refuse to perform the procedure.
As a cold snap hits much of Europe, many fruit farmers are worried about the summer harvest. Since mid-April here in Croatia and in other Balkan states, temperatures have plunged from near-record highs to unseasonal lows, bringing snow and ice to much of the region.
Bilo je vrlo toplo, čak do 30 smo jednog dana imali, a onda odjedanput evo došli smo na minusice. Voćke i ovo sve je uništeno, gotovo je. Praktički ako još gdje god koja jabučica ostane, bit će dobro.
In the Netherlands, farmers are ingeniously spraying the buds of their fruit trees with water. When they freeze over, it actually protects the buds. When the ice melts, heat is released, which prevents them from getting badly damaged.
Het zit op de tak al en er zit ook ijs om het vruchtje al. Want het bloemetje, daaronder zit het vruchtje. En dat vruchtje daar zit is ook al ingepakt met ijs. Dat ijslaagje dat zorgt voor een bepaalde isolatie en stollingswarmte. En door dat stollingswarmte blijft het vruchtje net boven nul.
And at higher altitudes in Europe, such as here in Austria, the heavy snowfalls are a challenge to drivers, forcing them to put chains back on their tyres. Forecasters are predicting the extreme conditions will run into next week.
A new UN report says the world wasted around 19% of the food produced globally in 2022. That's more than 1 billion metric tons. The UN Environment Programme's Food Waste Index report says 60% of food waste came from households. The UN says tackling waste is a priority as globally around 811 million people go hungry because of a lack of food. The skies over southern Greece turned orange on Tuesday as dust clouds blew in from North Africa. Strong southerly winds carried the dust from the Sahara Desert, making the capital Athens look like a Martian landscape. The dust is expected to clear on Wednesday as winds shift and the temperature drops.